thank you for giving us this opportunity to have this discussion with you this morning. With respect to what is an ongoing matter with respect to NGC, and I see this morning the Guardian again has reported on it with an article entitled "NGC's Great Gamble," providing or presenting rather their perspective on it. Noted energy reporter Curtis Williams. But before we get into that and to the meat of the matter, let me just ask this question: What is your position with respect to the manner in which this information would have come into the public domain, absent a formal report or a formal announcement by either the NGC or the government, where it is that it seems sensitive and confidential information has been shared with members of the media by clearly somebody who has access to such information and perhaps is not authorized to be sharing that information, again, without permission. And as the chairman of NGC, what is your position on that matter? Because I would have seen also a couple months ago where BP would have expressed their consternation with respect to, again, confidential information that would have been sent to the Ministry of Energy concerning the shortage of gas to Train-1, and they were very surprised that information was found its way into the public domain without approval. What is your take on that?
The energy sector continues to be a very complex sector, operating in different global jurisdictions. For example, you have to deal in the energy sector with your regulator, the Ministry of Energy. You have to deal with the governance issues, the Ministry of Finance. And you have to follow the processes of the company's ordinance, because there are laws by which you are expected to govern. You have regulations as it relates to the Integrity Commission. And therefore, then you have the multinationals. If we are contractually dealing with BP, whereas we're going to have information on BP, and if we're dealing with Shell, we're going to have information on BP and Shell, that information is not normally considered to be public information because they would contain matters around margins. And in the business, unless you understand all the pieces, it is very easy for you to come to the wrong conclusions. And unfortunately, and Dr. Rowley made the point, if you pulled out a document, as has been done in this particular situation, and you do not have all the other bits and pieces that went into that document, or you do not even have the story after that document, because what have been leaked to you is at a particular point in time, there is absolutely no way that you could understand the complexity of the issues. And I will demonstrate that as we speak in the context of this story, that in a real sense is a non-story. And I will explain that very simply. So the answer to the question is, those who seem to believe that they are dropping stories and they are dropping bombshells because of some notion that they have, they need to remember a couple of things. The first one is this. When you are asked to serve on a state enterprise, you really do so at great risk to yourself and your reputation, because to a very large extent, there is some politics involved in this particular issue. And you are drawn into the political domain, and you have to deal with all the negatives that are associated with that. Because there is no issue as it relates to the NGC insofar as this transaction is concerned. Because all the governance processes, all the matters that needed to be dealt with, all the scenarios that would have happened, has happened. You cannot, on the one hand, look at the organization that has maneuvered from a $2 billion loss to a $437 million profit over a 6-month period, and who have indicated what the reasons are, and then see that, in a particular transaction that took place within that continuum, that there is some issue that should concern the population, because there are mechanisms in place for questions that needed to be answered to be properly answered. And one of the mechanisms that have been used is through the Parliament. You know, there is a way in which these matters are to be dealt with for the orderly conduct of the state's business. Because in this particular matter, let me tell you what has occurred. We have been negotiating with other jurisdictions, and I don't want to name them at this point in time, to provide goods and services for them on the basis of the skills that we have, because we are, in fact, trying to move the organization globally based on the skill sets that we have. All of a sudden, you have an article that comes out into the newspaper that seeks to cast doubt on the integrity of the process and on the competence of the committee or of the company. That is going to be used in some instances against us in circumstances where you have others who have the competence but don't have these issues in the public domain. How is that helping us? How is that promoting Trinidad and Tobago? How is that helping us to leverage into new markets in circumstances where anything that is on the internet, those individuals who are seeking to do business with us will look at it, they will question it, and more than that, in some instances, they will simply draw conclusions without due diligence. So it is not something that we like. It is not something that should be tolerated. And it is why you see we've taken the view that on these matters, let us explain what the issues are so that our position is outside there, so that one understands that there really is no issue as it relates to bad investments or anything like that. There is another side of the story, and that's the side of the story that we are sharing. There are always those who are going to disagree. That's their right. But I think what is unfair in some instances is that you have one side of the story and you really don't have the other side, so that there can be balance or there can be conversations around the issues rather than around the blame game and the whole question of passing judgment without information. You know, I am amazed that, you know, very senior people calling for the resignation of the board and the minister without even understanding the issue. And therefore, to me, that's not how we are going to build this society, and that's not what we have to do. We really have to be a little bit more deliberate and try to understand a little bit more about what the issues are. So that's my take on the question.
So did you have an opportunity to see the story in today's Business Guardian that was carried by Mr. Williams?
Yeah, it was based on an interview I did on I-95.5 after listening to Curtis Williams' interview just before. And all I sought to do was to fill in some of the gaps and to put clarity within the context of matters that I still think are not understood. There are three issues in this whole situation that are different, but which some commentators treat as one. The first issue, which is an ongoing issue and continues even today, is the question of the reconfiguration of the Atlantic facility that contains 4 trains, and the ownership issues relative to that going forward, based on conversations around possible gas resources. That is an issue that is paramount to the survival of the energy sector, but it is also paramount to NGC because it tells us where we are going to get the gas from for selling to the petrochemical sector. But it also tells us the price at which that gas will be sold to us based on where it is coming from. If it is deep sea, it means that the cost of bringing it forward is going to be significantly higher than if it is in other areas. So you would see, for example, that the NGC of itself have started to invest in gas assets so that we can have a lower cost gas, which we can put into that system to bring down the eventual cost to the petrochemical sector, to give them an opportunity to compete on the global market. The market has changed. It used to be production and contract based. That is to say, you produce and somebody's going to take it. That's no longer the case. Today, you have to go into the market and you have to basically operate on the basis of margins. Now, that's something that we understand because we are also playing in that market. NGC is not simply an aggregator. NGC is also a player. We actually do, in fact, sell LNG cargoes that we have as a matter of our business. So which brings me to the next point. When we found ourselves in a situation in December where plants were saying to us that the cost of the gas and what they were getting for that gas in the market, they do not wish to have the gas, and we had no contracts with them going forward. We had a situation where we have gas, but we have no takers. At that point in time, the Train-1 maintenance of the plant, normal, every month, every year maintenance, was scheduled. This is not upgrade, as some would say. This is not investment in retooling. This is simply normal, ordinary maintenance. In fact, while the Train-1 maintenance was completed at around May, I think, or one of those dates, I don't recall what date it is, Train-2 went into maintenance, and I think there's a plan for Train-3 to go into maintenance, because the next time that would have been available in the schedule would be November. So had we not decided on doing the maintenance in January, it would have been due in November, and we would have had to do the maintenance in November. What happened is that at around January, we had gas. We knew the LNG market. We did the business case to see what would have been necessary if we wanted to move that gas to LNG instead of the petrochemical sector. There were two issues. The first issue is we couldn't do it because it was not ours to do. It had to be the unanimous agreement of the shareholders of Train-1. We are simply a 10%er. So we had to get the agreement of BP, Shell, and the Chinese who are the owners, to agree that were it possible to so do, they would have no difficulty in allowing us to use the train for LNG based on the gas that we had. We considered it, and we basically said, listen, given what we see, and given the fact that at that point in time, the information that we had was that petrochemical prices were going to stay low for the next 2 years, because those were the projections. It meant that for the next 2 years, the NGC would be suffering losses if it had no place for its gas. That was not something that we were prepared as a board to consider. So we took the view that if the train was operational, mechanically so, we are not changing any ownership structure. This ownership today is as it was then. It's still 10% by the government, 90% by the others. Then we would at least have a mechanism that we can move the gas that we have into LNG and therefore make some return. Therefore, moving the company from losses that we were looking at to some level of either recouping your costs for gas or making a small margin. When we looked at the numbers, we recognized that if we did it for a year, there would have to be a particular investment because we would have to do two things. While we've done the maintenance, the cost of using the facility, we would have to pay for it. That whole conversation that the Guardian basically discussed was on the basis that we would do this for a year. So the investment numbers that you were hearing, about $400 million or $500 million, is 12 months of operational activity based on cost and based on what we would have expected to get as revenue. As it turned out, the assumptions changed. The market changed dramatically because COVID-19 didn't behave, and the markets did not behave as the experts were predicting. Something happened, and there was a requirement for the product that changed in the markets in which the companies were operating the price. And all of a sudden, they now demanded the gas that we had. And more than that, they did something that we were trying to get them to do over the last 2 to 3 years. They entered into long-term contracts as opposed to where we were, which is 1 month extension, 6 weeks extension, 1 month extension. So in a sense, by virtue of that change, the NGC was able to stabilize its revenue base on the basis of those contracts. And therefore, the need to continue with the alternative plan for putting LNG into the maintained Train-1 facility for the year did not and could not happen. And therefore, we moved on with our business, and we understood that in the conversations that were taking place with the government as it related to the reconfiguration of the Train-1, 2, and 3, and 4 facility, all of those matters would have been discussed. That is as it relates to the decision on the investment, the maintenance investment in Train 2. The indemnity. Why the indemnity? The indemnity was because some of the decisions that needed to be made were not in the control of the NGC. Because the NGC, in the case of Train-1, is a 10% shareholder. So you had to depend on the decisions of BP, Shell, and the Chinese, as well as the government, because it meant that the licenses may have had to be changed to facilitate a different flow of the product. If any of those individuals decided that they were not going to support the decision, it meant that the costs that would have been associated with the maintenance would simply be sunk cost. That was not the intention, but that was a reality. On that basis, therefore, the board felt that if we are going forward, we need to ensure that that risk that we cannot manage is understood by all. And if the decision is to go forward with it, and it does not pan out in the way that we had planned, you could not then come and hold the directors responsible for that decision, because we were saying to you upfront that we are not in control of those decisions. And therefore, if we are not in control of it, we can only go on the basis of what we have been told. And if we have been told something and we made decisions on the basis of that, and those decisions do not pan out, while it is true that we would have made the decisions in the best interest and we would be covered under the Companies Act, we would be covered, because this is also a political situation. And we have seen circumstances where, notwithstanding that, if a government changes, they have the right. We do not wish to find ourselves in that situation, and therefore we are not prepared to take that risk unless there's an indemnity that says that you understood that these were the risks. That's what it was.
And that is the side that we've not been able to hear. And you've drawn reference to the point that, persons are seeing an opportunity to gain some level of political mileage from this, where in the recent past, there has been very few issues on which they can gain political mileage. But let me just ask you, Mr. We just need to take a quick ad set, and then we'll come back. So, yeah? So stay with me.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
And welcome back. Thank you for staying locked to the Street 919 FM. If you're just joining us, we are talking this morning with Mr. Conrad Enill, who is the chairman of the National Gas Company, with respect to the ongoing matter of NGC and Train-1. Mr. Enill, so as we understand it, the board is faced with two decisions, which is one, the course of action that you all would have opted to take, and option number two, the issue of decommissioning Train-1. Could you just walk us through what would be some of the implications if it is you all were to take the decision, as some are suggesting, which is to decommission Train-1? What would be some of the implications for not just NGC, but by extension, Trinidad and Tobago from a financial standpoint?
Yeah, well, the Atlantic facility was developed in a particular way. You had Train-1, then you added 2, then you added 3, then we built 4. And I think there's also consideration, if we have to, for doing 5, because at some point in time, based on the gas issue, that would have been the case. So let us discuss this particular issue. Gas basically will be discovered, or companies are going to invest in exploration of gas if you have facilities to move that gas once it is discovered into the marketplace. And there are 2 ways you do that. But in both instances, or there are 2, in Trinidad and Tobago, there are 2 destinations, but in both instances, you need processing facilities in order to move it from the sea into the ships. Those facilities are the trains that have been developed. If the decision is to basically change the construction or the configuration of the train, then there's the issue of decommissioning. The decommissioning is going to be based on contract provisions that would have been negotiated at the time of the ownership issues. Those would be, from an NGC perspective, I know that one of the things that will be required is for the train to be decommissioned and for all the environmental and other issues that would have been created as a result of the train to be dealt with. You therefore have to understand the engineering complexities that need to go into removing the facility, but keeping the facility of itself operational so that you could continue to get the revenue streams that the country is getting through the production of LNG. Those matters are still being discussed because it is the Atlantic team that basically has to sit down and work through what will be the steps if you take the decision, because that, again, is not a decision that has been taken as yet. What we do know is that BP, I think, has said on a number of occasions that we do not have gas for Train-1, but BP is not the only supplier of gas. But what complicates the issue is the entire ownership structure, which is something that the government is involved in looking at. So the only thing that I would say on the decommissioning activities is that there will be costs associated with it. And the other issue that we have to work through is the impact of decommissioning from a financial point of view would mean that we would have to write down some of the assets that are no longer producing. That has implications for the financials of the NGC Group. And it also has wider implications for other companies in which the NGC has investment. So it is not something that we are going to take lightly without understanding how this decision implicates other parts of the economy. And that is why it is taking long. You know, there are those that are saying, well, get to the point and all you need to do is to throw it up. Well, if you do that, there's a chain of events that will impact the interrelated organizations that you have that are connected to this asset. You need to understand those things before you simply run off and make decisions that may not be appropriate. You cannot look at this in the context of one decision. You have to look at this in the context of what is this entire thing going to do to the energy sector in the first instance, but more importantly to energy revenues, which the country desperately needs at this point in time to get on with its diversification and traditional economical programs. So you have to understand those issues, and those are very complex issues. And you have to understand how the impact of these things, as well as legacy issues that the company is dealing with. For example, the issue of TNTEC and the rates at which the population receives electricity, and the cost of gas that the NGC basically subsidizes. I mean, we don't like to talk about it because people get upset that if you talk about it, it means that somehow or the other it translates into higher costs. It doesn't have to, because we can basically look at moving power from where it currently is to some type of renewable, and that could, so there are lots of opportunities and possibilities. But you cannot do that in an environment where it's confrontational and where every Monday morning somebody is trying to tell you that, you're involved in this and you're involved in that. You get distracted. There is serious work that needs to be done, for which the people that are involved in it need to spend 100% of their time focused on the results, rather than having to defend things that, you really don't have to defend. I mean, at the end of it all, people are going to make decisions around, did I really sign up for all of this, and should I really do this? And the country loses people. The country suffers as a result of that. And when the country suffers, we create conditions where we don't have the resources, and then all of a sudden, we who have created the problems start to blame everybody else for the impact of the decisions that we have caused others to make. And, and then you hear all kinds of, you knew that you were going to get involved in this. No, that is not correct. We cannot treat the people who are involved in trying to create a better future for us as if they're enemies of the state. And unfortunately, that's what we do. So, long story. These are complex issues. We have people who are prepared to assist, but they are concerned about, in the process of trying to do the best job, whatever decisions they make, somebody comes and provides a judgment, but not only that, seeks to destroy their character and seeks to destroy whatever personal assets they have by using resources of the state in some instances to go after people. That can't be right. Not in this stage of our development.
I couldn't agree more. But Mr. Enill, you would have introduced into the conversation a number of issues for consideration, which for the most part so far has not really found its way in the mainstream with respect to social media and so on. Because when you read some of the comments of persons who would comment under posts that are related to this issue, the focus is on, well, BP and Shell said they don't have gas, so therefore that is the be-all and end-all. There's nothing else to consider. Forget whatever NGC says, because BP and Shell says so, that is that. And as I said, you would have introduced other things that persons need to be aware of before making a decision. But we know that there are persons who are opposed to the government, and therefore they see this as an opportunity, as we would have mentioned earlier, for cheap politics and would focus on that. But you would have mentioned before, gas would be found, right? And I would have listened to an interview that you would have done some years ago with the late Ricardo Welch, where he would have spoken about the acreage in Trinidad and Tobago, and with respect to the percentage that has been explored so far, and that we still have more. So speak to us with respect to that issue. What are our prospects in terms of finding new gas, one, and two, the fact that the price for natural gas on the international market within recent times has been, I think, a little above what we would have, the price that would have been budgeted for. Are we benefiting from that, or are we not, given the fact that, one, the decline in production, and two, fixed price contracts?
The way I want to answer that question is to explain the difference between production, price, expenditure, and taxes. Because a lot of people talk to the issue of price and production as if by itself it's a contributor. It is a factor, but there are other things that are involved. The energy sector needs to be managed in a particular way, because at the end of it all, the final outcome is taxes paid to the consolidated fund. And if we understand that, we understand that price and production deals with the revenue line. Profit deals with the expenditure line and the amounts that are being distributed either in terms of dividends to your shareholders and taxes to your government. So when we are talking about the reduction in production, it cannot be a conversation simply on production and price. It has to be Production and price, yes. It has to be efficiency as well. It has to be the cost structure of the organization. And you would recognize, BP in particular, Shell follows, that anytime you have a reduction in either price or production, you get a commensurate reduction in expenditure. You usually hear 100 people going home or 15% of the pop, because what they're seeking to do is to balance the model so that the profitability is maintained or increased. That happens as a result of the use of technology and as a result of things that you did not know before. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, for example, what we have seen over the years is that technology has allowed the companies to go back into areas that they would have abandoned before and see things that they did not see before based on new technology. And therefore, while the conversation would have been that there are no opportunities, by virtue of new technology, you can see prospects that you did not see before. And therefore, you can put that into the equation and you can monetize it. But those conversations and the things that they have found out will not find itself in the public domain, because those are matters that give them an advantage in the space that they have. And depending on when they go into the production cycle, it means that they will either be better able to make more profits or they would be able to be ahead of the competitors. That's the business that you're in. So because you're in that business, there are times when you have information that you cannot divulge, even if on the face of it, without the information, you take an licks for it. That's just the way it is. But you have to protect the businesses and you have to protect the industry because it's a global business. This is not about, and that is why in some instances you would have never heard me in any way make any negative comments about anything in the energy sector, because I think it is too important a sector for us to not understand that any comments that are made are interpreted by the players in a particular way. And it's either used for leverage or it is used for the disadvantage of us. And as far as I'm concerned, as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, not wishing to move anywhere else, it is my duty to try and do the best that I can for the time that I have the opportunity to so do. Because we will benefit from it. Why would we choose to do something that doesn't benefit all of us? Current positions notwithstanding, this is a appointment for a period of time. It has a beginning and it has an ending. And somebody else will come after and do something else. So one is really not about making a career out of this. One is simply trying to do the best that one can, while one has been given the responsibility to ensure that the next team that comes on board, as they will, and it doesn't matter which party is in power, the circumstances doesn't change. The fact that you change the leadership doesn't mean that the sector is going to say to you, well, prices are going to go up or prices are going to go down. You still have to manage pipeline infrastructure. You still have to manage the environment. You still have to manage the future. Those issues don't change. Right? So I'm saying that to say that there has to be an understanding that the energy sector cannot be used to gamble for whatever the reasons. It is just too important. And the changes that are taking place now, that, as we have seen, are taking place at a rate that you have to build an organization to even catch up with what is going on. Because the rate of change is just too quick. Let's talk about the gas issue. One of the elephants in the room is Lauren Manatee. There is a significant amount of gas that can deal with all our issues. The problem, however, has to do with geopolitics, which is an integral part of our determination. I have no doubt that the government, by virtue of how it has managed the vaccine issue with the international agencies, will at some point in time be successful in managing this particular issue. But I think it requires time. So from where I sit, it is not hopeless If we didn't have those resources, I would be saying to you, well, we should have difficulty. What I'm seeing is that the difficulty that we have is in trying to negotiate an outcome that helps us to bring those resources into production earlier rather than later. And that's the challenge that I see. And I'm aware that the government is working on them. And I'm aware that a lot of time, effort, and energy is being spent to try and see how you can conclude on those matters. And the government has said that, as and when they do, they will advise the population. And I'm okay with that.
And I think perhaps that's maybe one of the issues, because I know in light of, as you mentioned, the whole geopolitical sphere, where when this administration would have come in back in 2015, that there was a thrust towards developing that Laurent Manatee field, and then we had the issues with Venezuela and so on. And then there was a subsequent statement by the government indicating that they would seek to monetize their side of the field. Has there been any progress with respect to that?
Those negotiations are continuing, but they have not been completed as yet. So I think Minister Young is working on elements of that, and he would be in a better position to say where we are. I don't have any further information on it.
Well, under the last administration, Mr. Enill, the company that you now chair would have engaged in a number of activities that what one might consider outside of its remit. Billions of dollars spent on the Beetham wastewater treatment plant. Money was being spent to upkeep recreational grounds and sponsorships and a number of other things which would obviously have impacted on the company's profit position. And I know that issue of the Beetham wastewater treatment plant is one that has been a bone of contention for a lot of citizens who felt that it was a waste of money. And the very people who are today now chastising your board for the decision to preserve Train-1 would have supported that whole expenditure. Has there been any developments with respect to that, and how NGC is going to treat with that particular facility?
No, I think that's a matter that is still very much in the courts. There's a team that is looking at that, and really and truly, from that perspective, the focus is not on that. The focus is on the future. There would have been, yes, you are correct, every administration that is coming in will find that there may have been decisions that they do not agree with. But my position is that if those who were in charge decided that that is what they wanted to do, that is really not a matter for me. The matter for me is, how do those decisions now impact the future sustainability of the business, and what do we have to do either to mitigate any challenges that we foresee as a result of those decisions. And we've had to do that in 2020. For example, one of the contracts that would have been entered into when we evaluated the economics of the contract, we were told that we had to write down whatever value we would not have received as a result of that, and we did that. So that decision was not a decision that was made by any of us, but the impact of that decision we have to deal with. So when commentators have said to me, well, you have the distinction of being the chairman that presided over the loss, and therefore it is you. I'm saying, okay, I hear you, I understand what you're saying, and okay, that's just the way it is. That's the way it is. You have to deal with it.
Mr. Enill, is there now an opportunity for the government to increase its shareholding in Train-1, given the current situation and the fact that the major shareholders are saying, well, look, we're not interested in investing more money into this whole turnaround exercise, but the government is saying that we see opportunities, and as you would have mentioned just now, the future of the company and its prosperity. So is that something that the government is considering, or that NGC can make a play for?
So it's not an NGC issue, but let me step back and say that one of the principles that we had established a very long time ago when you look at the energy sector and when you're looking at negotiations with the multinationals is as follows. And sometimes it's difficult to get it because sometimes you are not in as good as a negotiating position because of the situation. But one of the things that we've always said is that there are two principles that guide the negotiation. One is that you should be able to get the best benefit for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That's one. And two, you should do absolutely nothing to make your sector not internationally competitive. So those are the two principles that you start to look at. And the way that you do that is, on the one hand, you do it by either ownership or licensing arrangements on the one hand, and on the other hand, you do it by fiscals. So you make sure you have a fiscal regime that supports whatever objective you want. But your fiscal regime has to be responsive to what is taking place in the market, because if you have a high price environment, it means that you need to extract more value for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, because beyond a particular price, the companies do not have to do anything at all to get super profits. And you should share in that profit. On the other hand, if prices are low and they have to spend more to produce the asset, then theoretically, you should share in that cost because it basically supports your revenue base. So those are some of the considerations that you have to bring into the conversation that the government must be looking at on an ongoing basis in order to try and get the best benefit. Because outside of that, and there are countries that we've seen where they have had massive amounts of revenue, but they have not been able to get any of that into the society. Because what has happened is that the negotiations that they had were not able to give them the benefits that they were looking at. And that's a strength that Trinidad and Tobago has, and that's a strength that the government uses from them.
Now, Mr. Williams, in his article, would also have made mention of there being a minimum threshold in terms of natural gas throughput that has to be maintained in order for the Train-1 to remain in operations mode. I think it's 250 million.
It's possible.
Is that available to keep the train in operations mode at this time? Given
No. Hold on. Let's be clear. At this time, the issue with Train-1 has to do with contracted gas. And it is in the public domain that BP has said that there is no gas for the train, so that in fact, there is no gas for the train. In those circumstances, the question of the configuration of trains going forward is where the discussion is taking place. So the issue with the NGC was simply ensuring that the train was maintained mechanically so that it is operational. The question of gas going in, there is no gas for it. And the gas that would have gone in December would have been gas that the NGC would have had for destination in the petrochemical sector, who could not have accepted it at the time based on the market conditions. So that's part of the conversations that the government are having now with BP and Shell and all the players, gas allocation issues going forward. And there are two issues with the gas. One is the allocation issue, and the other one is the price of the gas that the NGC would have to buy for the same petrochemical sectors going forward into the future years. So there's a lot of complex issues taking place at this point in time, for which there has been no resolution as yet, because these discussions are ongoing.
So there's also a school of thought that says perhaps NGCs should consider investing directly in finding gas, so in exploration and so on. Is that something that you all are minded to consider?
So let me talk to the configuration of the NGC Group at this point in time. There's a lot of conversation around the NGC simply being an aggregator. That is not the case. The NGC owns gas assets, in upstream. So we are owners of production. And quite recently, I think we have a 30% ownership in the BHP field, which means that the NGC also has a source of gas in its own right as an upstreamer. What we've sought to do in the NGC is to create an organization that is in every segment of the value chain, from exploration to market. And we've been able to do that. The reason that we were able to post a profit in the first 6 months is because when we looked at all these segments of the business, they all contributed positively to that profitability. So we are an integrated company that is operating in all the various segments. And there's a study currently being done to determine whether we are extracting all the value that could be extracted for us. And once that study is completed, whatever that study says, we will be minded to fix any of the challenges that we currently have. And we had to do that because the company now must go global. We can't fight anywhere else but global. And we can no longer depend on others to fight for us. We have to develop the capabilities where we go out there. And that is why, for example, on one of the subsidiaries, the PPGPL company, for example, Phoenix Park, we have acquired a company in the US that actually provides product for Mexico. You know, we are into that business as well. So we are expanding globally. We have relations with LNG in China. We're doing work in Ghana. We are looking at Guyana and Suriname. Incidentally, just to make the point, one of the markets that we had looked at in the LNG situation was the Caribbean, because we believe that we could produce LNG to the Caribbean at a cost that is lower than what they currently pay. And that is something that we are going to be pursuing in terms of small LNG as a part of our market going forward. So there are a lot of things that are happening positively on the NGC side to try and ensure two things. One, that as the world changes from where it is today, traditional fossil fuel, to a carbon neutral, carbon zero world, that we are there. And you would see wherever there are new opportunities, we are signing MOUs with individuals so that we participate in the knowledge that they would have insofar as that is concerned. And we are ensuring that nobody is ahead of us and that we can guide the policy conversations to make sure that we are appropriately understood in the context of this global market. That's what we do. We've looked at the organization and we have recognized that we need to have independent research. So we are looking at putting our capability that will allow us to get research on these emerging opportunities independently. Of course, we will link with all the other agencies, the UE and all of those, but they have their own very specific focus. Our focus is going to be, how do we monetize these new opportunities so that we can create a sustainable stream of revenue for the company and by extension for the people that trying to do. That's what our focus is.
Right, so as we draw almost to a close, there is the view that the Minister of Finance does not have the authority to grant the indemnity requested. If that is so, what is the alternative for the board, and what is the way forward? Because this matter is not going to, I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon, at least not if you leave it up to
the matter for the indemnity is a matter for the Minister and for the Attorney General, so I am not going to comment on that. I think it has to be guided by those who have the authority to so do. And at this point in time, it is really the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago as well as the Minister of Finance. And, I have a different view, but I would not express it. That's for them. And I don't think that we would have asked for something that we didn't think was available to us in the context of either past. Let me leave it there.
So we may be able to take maybe a quick call or two. So the lines 3420081 4665391. We have just about another 5 or 6 minutes or so, folks. So if you want to ask Mr. Enill any questions or you just want to make a quick comment, please feel free to do so now while we have Mr. Enill with us. And certainly as this matter continues to evolve, if the need be, I'm sure Mr. Enill will be more than happy to come back. So let's see who we have here.
I must commend Mr. Enill on saving his peace on that issue that has to do with the Attorney General and the Minister of Finance. So they can't say it's political because he's a PNM when that matter turns up. But you know one thing? I want to make a quick comment. Yesterday, I turned on my telly and there was a thing with Enill Roberts said something about the former speaker, what she is, not the speaker, the president of the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an independent senator, half Chinese gentleman, and the independent senator that was on the radio. And after hearing these two independent senators, after hearing Wayne Mark and those two independent senators, Mr. Conrad Enill, I give you kudos, because after hearing two independent senators made a statement and agreeing with the outcome of what should be done with Mr. Enill Roberts coming to make an apology, and hearing the opposition, no class. Mr. Enill, thank you very much, and hope that we have this indemnity, and hope that we get Train-1. As they say, there is no gas from the company, but we have gas there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just for me to get the gas, right, fellas? So, gentlemen, my financial group, thank you guys very much. Enjoy your day.
Thank you, sir. All right, so let me see who we have here. Right. Hello, good afternoon.
Blessed afternoon to you, Dominic.
Good afternoon, sir.
Well, I wonder if you're going to spend that after hearing the facts.
Dominic.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And Mr. Enill, if you're still there.
Yes, he's still here.
My question is, why Dr. Rowley did not focus his energy on Suriname and Guyana and leave Venezuela with their oil? All these years, why they didn't focus on Suriname and Guyana and leave Venezuela alone? I'd like to get a response, please. Thank you.
All right.
I will leave it there.
Thank you. Stanley, you want to take that one?
Oh, of course. This is a matter that has been going on for about 20 years now. The Lauren Manatee is a reservoir of gas that 2.7 TCF belongs to Trinidad and Tobago and 7.3 belongs to Venezuela, and it's on our border, it's cross-border gas. To get to where we are today, there's a number of things that we had to do, and there are a number of governments that would have contributed towards getting us here. The first thing you had to do is you had to put the law in place. And I remember having to sit down and go through cross-border governance structures with the Venezuelan government. And it had to go through their parliament. And they have a process that we had agreed to in terms of how they would determine what the amounts are, how they would determine how it should be developed. And all of those matters would have been dealt with, certainly while I was in government. What happened is that in order to go forward, and I think that the last administration would have started a conversation about monetizing this, and then all of a sudden, the geopolitics came into play. The United States basically said that we are going to be doing something with Venezuela, and that conversation could not continue. So it's not a question of not wanting to do anything. It's a question of these are the circumstances that the country has found itself in. And while that is going on, the reservoirs that we have, that we were getting product from, started depletions. And you have to find large replacement, which we have been looking for, and we have found some of it in deep sea. But the problem is that deep sea requires you to have a different infrastructure and a different fiscal, and all of those matters take time. It is not going to happen overnight. The other issue that I think people need to understand is that the energy companies plan for 20 and 30 and 40 years, whereas we plan for 3 years, because on the third year, you have to get into election mode and so there are planning issues around these matters that interfere in some instances with our ability to see longer term and our ability to continue with the work done by others. And that's why, I keep making the point that energy is not one of those that you should be fooling around with. You should really have continuity of policy as it relates to that sector.
Nice. Well, I see, unfortunately, Mr. Enill, we are out of time. But as this matter develops, I certainly would want to bring you back, because there's so much more I think that we could talk about on this issue and other matters related to the energy sector. And I hope that you'll be willing to take up that invitation. So again, let me thank you for spending some time with us this morning and bringing some level of clarity to this whole matter. And hopefully it would bring some resolution to it going forward.
Yeah, Dominic, thanks. And as long as there are issues that require clarification, I would make myself available to so do, because I think that is a requirement for the office that I currently hold.
Nice. And we appreciate that, and we'll definitely take you up with it.